series on the book of Ecclesiastes. We talked about Ecclesiastes being one of the books in the Bible that is commonly referred to as the wisdom literature. The other books that constitute the wisdom literature, as I mentioned last week, are Job and Proverbs, mainly because of their universal concern on issues of humanity and the problems and the challenges that we all face. But the books often have competing viewpoints about human concern. The writer, widely recognized as King Solomon, with all his riches and wisdom, still feels a sense of restlessness and dissatisfaction. In one of the verses he says, "All is vanity and chasing after the wind." He questions life's purpose throughout the book, even using the phrase, the futility of life. But at the same time, he has positive things to say about life, such as he, meaning God, has set eternity into the heart of people, or every person who eats and drinks sees good in his behavior. It is the gift. The best known part of Ecclesiastes, as we referred to last week, is chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. And one of the verses in chapter 3 is a time to speak and a time to keep silent, among others, which we will emphasize today. It speaks to the fact, all these verses 1 through 10 speak to the fact that there are no standard formulaic answers to life's pressing and perplexing problems. And the ability to speak at the right time or to remain silent at the right time often constitutes wisdom, our main topic today. I remember the story of an angel appearing at a university faculty meeting. It tells the dean that in return for his unselfish and exemplary behavior, the Lord will reward him with either infinite wealth or infinite wisdom. Without hesitating, the dean selects infinite wisdom. "Done," says the angel, and disappears in a cloud of smoke and a bolt of lightning. Now all heads turn to the dean, who is surrounded by a faint halo of light. And one of his colleagues says to him, "Say something wise." The dean looks at everybody and says, "I should have taken the money." Wisdom comes from many sources, including yours and my willingness to put our prejudices aside and remain open to the movement of God's Spirit, as I alluded to last week. Although the well-known Serenity Prayer has been mainly attributed to an anonymous source, it was actually written by 20th century American theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a master at expressing life's dichotomies and the importance of reconciling life's oppositional ideas. Many of you know how the prayer goes. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. For instance, we know that in most instances, it is difficult to change others. Most people are hardwired in certain ways, and the more one tries to push one to change, the more one pushes back, as we know. That's where wisdom is tested, knowing when to suggest and to encourage change in others and when not to. And the more we are open to the leading of the Spirit, the better chance we have of doing the proper thing at the proper time. But when there are opportunities to help change others' attitudes for the better, or even help change policies within institutions for the better, this is where we need God's strength to give us the courage to do it. And as Reinhold Niebuhr said, the wisdom is to know the difference between when to recede and when to move forward. And wisdom can result from learning from the mistakes that you and I make in the past in order to do better next time. And the hope always is that the times of tripping up will coach you up to make better decisions the next time around. Looking at King Solomon, the author of Ecclesiastes, He was concerned that he was too young to inherit the kingdom of Israel from his father David. In addition to this concern was probably the understanding that he had enormously big shoes to fill, and that he and his father had different ways of approaching things. His father, King David, was charismatic, he was fearless, he was seemingly invincible, like the confident gunslinger riding into town. After all, he was the one, as we know, that found the gap in Goliath's armor and convincingly and courageously slayed him with a pebble from his slingshot. But on the other hand, David's indiscretions in his immoral behavior translated many times into a total absence of wisdom, where wisdom was greatly needed. Solomon, on the other hand, was what Israel needed at that time. He was more bureaucratic. He was more interested in establishing systems and a sense of order in the way Israel governed itself. Centralization of power enabled Solomon to initiate and to complete tremendous building projects for the kingdom, including finishing Israel's temple. Solomon accumulated great wealth, but at the same time, he's known for his great wisdom. And one night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream with a question: "What would you like me to give to you?" Solomon in the dream replied, "O Lord, you have let me succeed my father as king, even though I am very young and I don't know how to rule. Here I am among the people you have chosen to be your own, a people who are so many they cannot be counted. So give me the wisdom I need to rule your people with justice and to know the difference between good and evil." The Lord replied in the dream, "I will give you more wisdom and understanding than anyone has had before or will ever have again." And so Solomon tells us one of our lessons today from Ecclesiastes, read by Jan, the value of wisdom. He says, "Wisdom strengthens a wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city." But like everything else, in order to grow in this area of wisdom, Solomon had to have the desire to put aside his own preconceived prejudices in order to be able to discern between what was just and what was unjust. And throughout Solomon's reign, his wisdom was certainly tested, as ours is on a daily basis. So we examine Ecclesiastes 3 and Solomon's urging to understand that for everything in his wisdom, that there is a season. The more wisdom we accumulate, the more we understand that, the better choices we make, of course. This morning I would like to concentrate on there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. I think this is particularly relevant for everyday life. Not too long ago, I read the columnist George Will's column on remaining silent, and he said, "Don't speak unless you can improve the silence." Wisdom is tested many times when you want to say something or write something that could have a lifetime of impact on the person on the receiving end. You know, the old saying, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt you." Well, we know that's not true. Wisdom is often best illustrated in our ability and our willingness to keep silent when it is best to keep silent, or to speak when it is best to speak. President Abraham Lincoln said, "I'm rather inclined to silence." James in the New Testament, in talking about the power of speech, writes, "See how great a forest is set afire by such a small flame." Meaning how the wrong thing said at the wrong time can be devastating to a person. James says that from the same mouth can come both blessing and cursing. You know, words can both build up and they can tear down. They can be gracious or generous. They can be insensitive and indifferent. They can be loving and patient, or they can be careless and demeaning. But wisdom teaches us to know when to speak and when not to speak. There's not a day that goes by when our wisdom isn't tested in what we say or in what we don't say. But wisdom often requires us, doesn't it, to be silent when we attempt to shout out an opinion before listening to others and getting all the facts. But putting our words within the understanding and belief that every human being on earth has been created in the image of God should help us offer the words that will uplift and not tear down. And wisdom teaches us to keep silent when the time calls for silence. Vocalist and drummer Don Henley from the group The Eagles, he said, "You want to step off the wave before it crashes into the beach." And so it is with what we say. Spiritual wisdom teaches us to step off the wave of words before they do damage to another. Some of you may remember one of Aesop's fables about a turtle who envied the ducks who swam in the pond where he lived. As he heard about all the ducks' travels, he himself wanted to fly and travel too. So finally, 2 ducks offered to help him. One of the ducks said, we will each hold an end of a stick in our mouths, and you hold a stick in the middle of your mouth, and we will carry you through the air so you can see what we see when we fly. But you have to be quiet. You have to be quiet, or you will be sorry. Excited beyond belief, the turtle took hold of the stick, and away into the sky they went. The ducks flew above the trees, and they circled the mountains, and the turtle was overjoyed with his new view of the world. He marveled at all the flowers on the hillside. And just then a crow flew past, astonished at the sight of a turtle flying through the air carried by 2 ducks. He said, "Surely this must be the king of all turtles." "Why, certainly," the turtle began. But when he opened his mouth, he fell quickly to the ground. The turtle discovered there's a time to speak and a time to keep silent. When one considers the author of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon, he was asking God to help him say the right things, make the right decisions, considering the magnitude of his responsibility, which enabled him to offer encouragement when it was needed, sympathy when sadness struck, love in the wake of loss, diplomacy in times of tension, strength in times of weakness. Solomon's wisdom, when it came to this ever so important verse in Ecclesiastes, stood the test time after time. On the flip side of this verse is the time to speak when it is important to speak. When the 16th century Protestant reformer Martin Luther stood before the presiding officer of the Diet of Worms, Johann Eck, Eck demanded that Luther speak, recant his writings and teachings against what Luther knew to be the absolute corruption of the existing church. Luther simply said, "Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God." The old hymn, "Once to every man and nation comes a moment to decide in the strife of truth and falsehood for the good or evil side." During the rise of Nazi Germany, German theologian and Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller was initially a supporter of Adolf Hitler, as were many pastors and many church members. Eventually, Niemöller broke away from the support of Hitler, became a part of what was known in Germany as the Confessing Church, a movement within the German Protestant church that arose in opposition to government-sponsored effort to unify all Protestant churches into a single pro-Nazi Protestant church. For his opposition, Niemöller spent 8 years in a concentration camp, barely escaping death. After he was freed, he lamented the fact that he had not spoken out early enough. He said, "First they came for the Jews, and I did nothing because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the socialists because I did nothing because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did nothing because I wasn't a member of a trade union. Then they came for the Catholics, and I did nothing because I wasn't a Catholic. Then they came for me, but there was no one left to help me." A time to be silent and a time to speak. Pray to God for wisdom.